All right, we're going to start our first panel here. We wanted to start the day with what are the challenges we faced to date, right? And some of the gentlemen that are, expected to meet those needs of the service members that live and work on the base. And so we'll go through this. Again, this is a continuation of a conversation. That's what we're shooting for. Before we do that, I wanted to frame some of what we know about mobility now and the challenges. And give that kind of top-level introduction. So we have one solution for meeting the official business mobility needs for people moving from point A to point B for work, and that's a fleet of vehicles. That fleet of vehicles, whether it's on Camp Pendleton or whether it's on Miramar, we do actually a great job. We get a good price on the leases through GSA. We optimize how we can meet the needs of different dispersed units across the base. We've done a great job through the years really optimizing that. And as you look at fleet management, we're almost as good as you can do. So, I mean, there's in the margins we can improve it. We aren't spending too much money on it, but we aren't meeting the need. I mean, you can see, I showed you earlier, 49,000 DOD personnel on Camp Pendleton, over 12,000 DOD personnel on Miramar. And how many fleet vehicles do we optimally provide them? I'll tell you, in 18 years, I've never checked out a fleet vehicle myself. I've rarely ridden in one. And this is someone that actually has spent at least half of his career only having one vehicle for my family, which means I just did without, or I got around with however I needed to get around. So we're going to talk about, there's the hidden cost, right? So there's the vehicle that we provide and we optimally provide and we make sure that people are getting where they need to go. We're optimizing it for cost and performance. We're doing a pretty good job with that. We're spending money, but appropriate money in my estimation. But then beyond that, there's the hidden cost. And that next slide, or the next column here, oh, sorry, I thought I was forward. So you see some of this here. The next category there is the number of Marines that live in barracks. So we have 18,000 service members on Camp Pendleton living in barracks. We have 3,000 service members living in a centralized block on a barracks here a half-mile away. For that demographic, 18 to 25-year-olds, and actually across nationally, the personal ownership of vehicles is 64% in this nation. And so if you project that 64% of those service members own a vehicle, and the average cost of owning a vehicle across the entire life cycle of that vehicle is $9,000 a year. We're talking about young service members that make about $27,000 a year, paying a third of their paycheck for a vehicle. Now that's fine. We provide them barracks. But when you look at utilization, 4% nationally is the utilization of a vehicle for just your standard civilians across the nation. Now, what if you live on base and you work in some proximity to that? We estimate that it's less than 1% that our Marines utilize their vehicles. Our goal is not to take Marines' vehicles away, nor to discourage them from getting vehicles, but rather, how can we meet their needs without them feeling like they have to get a vehicle to be able to do what they need to do, both personally and officially. And so what I estimate there is that $9,000 a year with the number of vehicles that we estimate, that's a hidden cost. That is a cost that we, the Marine Corps, push on our service members, the 18,000 and the 3,000 in those two bases. There are places in Camp Pendleton that when you enter the base, it will take 25 minutes for you to get to the Marines barracks. No matter which direction, you got 3 options to how to get there, and all of them take at least 25 minutes. My brother-in-law was working there recently. It is difficult, and young Marines have no other solution. Public transit simply can't meet the needs and is not optimal to meeting a diverging use case in supply and demand, especially on our bases today. So next down is housing. So the number of family members, 7,000 service members, so 7,000 families living on Camp Pendleton housing, over 500 military housing on this base and those family members. 1.9 vehicles per household is the rate in San Diego, just of normal populace. So you look at those costs that are pushed on to the families that are moving all over the country, families and spouses that Spouses are having to change all the time. Job opportunities are not great for them because of the challenge of the lifestyle that they live. And so you paint a picture that, hey, come to our base, move on to our base. You're going to be here for a few years, but we don't have any solutions for how you get around. The onus is on you. You will own a vehicle, or you won't be mobile. One of the times that we only had one vehicle, I was living in Northern Virginia and working at the Pentagon, and I would take a bus for 25 minutes and then catch on the metro for the other 25 minutes. Didn't really meet the dynamic lifestyle needs, but I will tell you it was free. It was free because the federal government has programs, and this relates to that last line here, the van pooling. So here in this region, between federal subsidy and local subsidy by San Diego Association of Governments, it's essentially free for service members to have a van pool vehicle and ride together to work every day. But it's not dynamic. It can't really meet their needs. When you look at the low numbers here, 500 van pool members out of 24,000 commuters when it's free on Camp Pendleton, 178 van pool members out of 85,000 or 8,500 commuters here at Miramar, and you say it's free, but it's not dynamic. It's not meeting their needs on a changing basis. It's a relationship that had to be fostered between that one individual that created got the van, and then the 4 others that said, hey, I'll sign up with you. We happen to live close. The program doesn't really help them. And then it's just a relationship between them. There are dynamic opportunities through carpooling that could meet the changing needs on a basis just like you would come to expect whether you take a Lyft or an Uber. But those things won't emerge by themselves. And so these are numbers that we utilized back in 2016 to just paint a picture. I wanted to just frame it for some of the challenges that we're talking about here. And so I'm going to first have Colonel Dockery talking about his experience here in Miramar and across, collectively over 75 years of, life in the service. Many, many bases, many, many moves. So not only do they know it personally, now they're tasked of helping meet the needs of those service members on their bases today. So, sir.
Hey, thanks, Brandon. So I'll start off with, I was going to start off with something different, but something you said there just kind of triggered some thoughts in my head as far as kind of the ride sharing and the van pools not meeting needs because it's not dynamic enough. And I'll kind of pull that apart a little bit, and maybe that'll get some thoughts going. But I think what you're getting at with that is, having served at the Pentagon myself and done the exact same thing, is that, and actually tie this back to Jay's point too. Jay's talking about building platforms. The platforms are there. Sometimes we kill ourselves with not having the right policies in place to support the platforms. And sometimes I think we kill ourselves by not having the right cultures in place to support the platforms. And so when Brandon's talking about it's not dynamic enough out here, I think is what you're getting at is the work environment here at Miramar versus the work environment back at the Pentagon, and the culture that goes along with that are kind of two different things. So certainly what I saw when I was at the Pentagon was, kind of using almost the same thing, bus to the metro and on in, and then metro back home. I worked with quite a few folks that were either van pooling or they'd sign up for a bus service, and the culture up there in the Pentagon was such that if we were working on something, and it's a dynamic work environment at the Pentagon. We were working on something, and all of a sudden, hey, this is due tomorrow. We got to stay late and do it. If there was one of 4 folks working on it, and that person said, hey, my bus is leaving at 1700, I got to go. The other 3 of us looked at him, and there were no hard feelings. Like, hey, we'll see tomorrow. We got it. We can make it happen. I think a lot of times, culturally out here at Miramar, in a flying squadron, what you're looking at is depending on the health and the ebbs and flows of aircraft maintenance and readiness, maintenance officer is going to look at his maintenance department and say, hey, we're staying late. And so now all of a sudden, if you're that one Marine that's got a bunch of quals to sign off on different maintenance actions, and your van pool is leaving at 1700, you're not getting on the van. Well, then what do? You got to stay with somebody that lives. You got to figure that out. And so I think a lot of times our culture doesn't allow for that. I think our manning doesn't allow for that, because we just can't look at that Marine and go, hey, we'll see you tomorrow. You're good. You can take off. And so I don't know if that's kind of what you're getting at, but maybe that's a way to kind of start the conversation as far as some of the things out here just aren't dynamic enough to serve large populations.
Thanks, sir. Colonel Linez, you talk about your challenges in Hawaii or across your career. you might want to pass that one over if I can.
You know, Chim's got a good point about culture. I think an elephant in the room sometimes with mobility is we love our cars, right? We love our cars, and young Marines to get a car, that's a big deal. So, coming from the Pentagon and then working on Marine Corps Base Hawaii, which is a beautiful place to work and actually walk to work, I really think that we could have a great dynamic means to get someone from point A to B, but if you don't get past the urge for some young 20-year-old to want to drive his car, right? So that standard's pretty high. We could put things out, and maybe they may not use it. So I offer that, and I think that there is a way to do it. There is a way to make the experience from going from A to B something they want to do. Okay, we all want to do, vice, jump in our small little cars at our little piece of home with our music. So I think about that often, culturally for bases that have, the majority are young people that like cars. But I do think that that's a different type of hurdle, right? Different type of hurdle. Hawaii is interesting. The weather's always great. The weather's always great. So you think about wanting to use an alternative rather than your POV to get to, the base is only about 3 miles long and 2 miles wide. So just too big to walk everywhere because the roads are insufficiently laid down. And then just a heck of a place when you got 19,200 people that all want a car to try to get around. So I'd offer that. There is a culture piece, like Colonel Dockery says. Big part of that is we love our cars. And then when you want to walk or do something as an alternative to drive, you got to be laid out correctly.
Here. Eric, if you can help us with the audio here. I don't know if we're holding it too close. If you can just try that, sir.
Okay. How's that sound?
See how the echo's happening. We have both
Okay.
of these off. So Colonel Williams is coming from the region, so Marine Corps Installations West, responsible for all the West Coast bases as Chief of Staff, and so more of a regional perspective go alongside his own experience.
So I want to pick up on something Jay talked about. He said, how do we used to acquire vehicles? And right now we acquire vehicles, in a 20th century manner. Our bases and installations are all laid out in a similar, way to accommodate those vehicles. So if you look at how our installations, I call them installations 1975, it's, we're designed around cars. And if you think through, and again to Brandon's point, we're looking for installations at 2035 and beyond. If you get that perspective and you think about what type of governance we're going to need for an installation in 2035 and beyond as technologies and social changes happen. I mean, Boogie's exactly right. Right now, we all love our cars because we're familiar with it. But as a generation that's growing up on rideshare, a generation that's growing up on crowdsource, that's growing up on information and ability to move, society is going to change with it. And we have to be prepared, and we have to start thinking about a series of governance, a series of governance, for our installations in the future that are going to accommodate the technologies and the social changes for the future. I was recently out at Arizona State University and talked with, we toured around their facilities, and they're doing some phenomenal things, but they looked at their facilities and said, our buildings from now on are going to be, net zero in terms of energy and emissions. And I asked them, hey, what do you, I asked the facilities director, what's your installation going to look like in 20 years? Or what's your campus going to look like in 20 years? First thing he said is, we're not going to have any parking garages. There'll be no private vehicles on campus. And they're designing the campus in order to accommodate the fact that they're going to be rideshare, driverless, autonomous vehicles that are going to provide, and the campus will be set up so so you can get in and out of work. And in 18,000 Marines in barracks now that are all going to the same place of duty or very similar for where they're going to go for their training. We have to, if we could have some autonomy in terms of autonomous vehicles and the fleet of vehicles that, you know, get the Marines from their barracks to where their place of duty is, and they can do that reliably. It can be an app, it can be driven by their command, you know, but you got to have the infrastructure set up to do that. And right now we're focused on, you know, in the room, I'm sure, you know, is mobility. How many public works officers are here? Any public works officers in the crowd? You know, how are we looking at our installations from mobility, from an infrastructure perspective, and what structures are we putting in place to accommodate that of what's going to happen in the future? And I think that that vision is something that is going to be upon us very quickly. And so we really have to consider that as we look forward to some governing principles of how we're going to set up our installations in the future in order to enable you know, the reduction in traffic. And part of how I look at this is I look at the bills that we pay on a monthly basis or an annual basis, and all the money, the tens of millions of dollars that go out to sustainment, that go out to utilities, that go out to construction of, you know, to accommodate individual cars and people and how they move about. If we could drop that all down, you know, that money gets either instantly recapitalized or it gets focused back on, you know, operational forces. So just some thoughts there.
Thanks, sir. So let's focus on our young Marines. So for the crowd, you may not know, but 182,000 Marines in the Marine Corps. Over 50% are 25 years old and younger. All right, we have the youngest average age in all the services. And so it's very important to look at the culture and what's changing. You know, for us, we've now aged to, I mean, that's almost our kids' ages now, the 18-year-olds that are coming into the service, that are coming onto on our base and living in our barracks. You know, a car represented for us when we turned 15 in Louisiana or 16 or wherever you're from, it represented freedom. It represented your movement outside of your house, the adventure and the socialization. Cars don't represent that to young people anymore, not the same way that they used to. The trends are showing that, you know, 18 to 25-year-olds are moving away from even getting a license often if they're in urban environments. They're putting it off further and further. They don't want the responsibility. The adventure and the social and the fun is now linked to their phone, which they all have. And so the trends are, even if they get a license, they don't want the cumbersomeness and the responsibility of owning a vehicle, depending on where they live. And so our demographic that's coming in, that makes up 50% of our service, that's their mindset. Yet we're the ones that sit here and make the decisions, right? How do we meet the needs of those young service members? How do we anticipate and help us understand, you know, where they're coming from and what they actually want to do, what type of services they are? And so, sir, I was going to come to you first and just see, you know, your thoughts on young service members across your base.
Yeah, as you were talking through that, that's exactly where I was thinking, is that I think the younger Marines, there's still that population, and Boogie hit it. And I'll tell you, when you were talking about that, last weekend I was at the Auto Skills Center changing my own oil, and all those bays were full because there's Marines in there, and they're working on their cars because they like it. They got a car. They're you know, the Marine next to me was telling me how he bought a car for $6,000. He was going to put $2,000 into it, and it was going to be worth $10,000. I'm making $2,000, and I was like, all right, it's awesome. And I was helping him take his hood off. Anyway, so there's that culture, right? But I think there is also that movement, and certainly I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and she's lukewarm about driving. I mean, she kind of likes it and stuff, but it wasn't like me or my brother when we were growing up. I mean, we were ready to go. Like, I want my license as fast as I can get it. And she's like, yeah, whatever, it'll happen. And I think that's changing. And so, you know, I think there will be those bigger and bigger populations that would be open to this. You know, and of course, wearing this, we can always mandate it, which is sometimes a morale killer. But your other point, I think, is also germane, is that a lot of the experience needs to be linked to something that I can hold, you know, about 2 feet or so from my face, depending on how good my vision is. And that's the fact that if we do start putting in some of these different things, like, you know, evolutionary, like Uber or Lyft and all that, and then we go more towards the revolutionary side where it's autonomous vehicles on regular routes, I think probably one of the keys is going to be, you know, I want to get things done. I want to get it done now. That's a big, you know, GSD, get stuff done, for MCCS. The Marines want to get stuff done. They want to get stuff quickly. So I want to know where that shuttle is right now, and so I should be able to probably look at my phone and go, okay, well, there's the 6 shuttles that are on base. That one's going to be coming around in about 6 or 7 minutes. I'll make sure I'm out there. And so those are kind of my thoughts. I think the Marines, over time, they're going to be more and more open to it, especially if the price of gas keeps going up.
Yeah, I think, General Colony said sometimes the older people just got to get over themselves, and I think that's it. We're realizing that it is changing, but on a base you'll have someone that loves their car and, a younger one that wants to get a bus, but you can't get the bus on the base. So sometimes it's our own inability to be flexible and then to adjust our rule sets. I think a young Marine that's on K-Bay, which is on the opposite side of the island, who wants to go to Waikiki, who doesn't want to go to Waikiki, right, would forego a car if we could get a bus that could go from K-Bay to Waikiki. And this is a known problem, but that's hard to do with current laws and rule sets and how we spend money. I think it is a layered problem. So I think we recognize we have different populations. We have rule sets that help some, and I think in most of our installation next scenarios, we face the reality that our own rule sets and ability maybe to take risk with free market things kind of holds us back. I think the Uber and Lyft problem or challenge with security will probably be talked about some more. But there are things that young people want to use, but we're a little behind in getting rule sets to support that.
So I want to bring it.
Can I just expand
Yes,
on?
absolutely,
So I like where Boogie's going with the rule sets, and this is kind of what I was thinking about. As we were looking at that other slide where you had if we could bring that other slide up where we had the populations out there, when you said rule sets, what it brought to my mind, again, it goes back to the opening comments at Jay's, and what it started to crystallize in my mind was this idea or framework of platforms, policies, and culture. And so you look up there, and there's kind of 4 lines. We got fleet, we got barracks. So fleet, like official business. There's barracks, there's housing, there's commute. Probably we talk about personal mobility, but I would lump in there, supply, logistics, and those types of things. Again, from an aviation perspective, I'll kind of take a quick tangent. Supply and logistics, you're talking about moving not just people but things. Aviation's a game of seconds, and the way I'll explain that to you is if I'm in an F-18 on the flight line and I start up my airplane and my mission computer 1 goes down, and I call into maintenance control and I say, hey, my mission computer 1's broken, I need a new one. Well, if they don't have a new one sitting in the squadron, it's got to come from a different place on base called the Marine Aviation Logistics Squadron. Depending on how fast that mission computer 1 gets to the flight line, if it's 10 seconds too late, I've already missed my takeoff time, which means I've missed my range time because everything's a finely coordinated ballet. So if I'm one airplane in a 4-ship, that MC1 comes 30 seconds after I've made the decision, I can't make it, my jet's down, I'm shutting down. I just missed out on a training sortie, and that was 30 seconds. That's the game that we're in on a daily basis. So we lump all this in. I'll go back to the rule sets now. We lump all this in. Well, I want to move Marines for official business. I want to move Marines from barracks maybe out, around the base to the exchange or out on Liberty. I want to move my folks that live on base and housing, my dependents, and I've got commuters that come in. But it's all in nice separate lines on the slide, right? But the answer I just want is yes. And so I think, one of the things that the challenges with policy, with rule sets is, well, can I have one vehicle, just an autonomous vehicle of some sort? Can I have one vehicle where I can move around airplane parts and a dependent and a Marine that's going to the exchange all in the same vehicle? And so I see John Stimson in the crowd, and this is not a spear at you, John. He's my lawyer, but there will be lawyers involved, right? That's the 4-letter word that's going to be in all this. What pot of money paid for that vehicle? Well, if it came from this pot of money, then you can't put airplane parts on it. What about Duncan just ran out of hot coffee this morning at 8:20. Well, can they put their stuff on and get it over here? I don't know. what's the rule set say? And so are we willing to change the rule set? Where does it have to get changed? I think we're gonna run into a lot. Or does it just mean we can't, instead of having 6 autonomous vehicles, we have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 24, and you can get on the green one, but you can't put parts on the red one, that just food for thought.
Yeah. Well, let's take that into like your actual skill sets as pilots, right? So you brought in the maintenance criticality, sir, of what you do for the Marine Corps. Let's also talk about what you know about air traffic management and why, as we hear later today about drone delivery and all, like, that everyone's heard about Amazon delivering, parts is their vision, or sorry, your parcels to your doorstep, right? Amazon Air Prime. What's the challenges in and around airspace with that? Why do we have to be intentional if we're actually going to unlock those opportunities? Because security and kind of the bureaucracy stands in our way. And so I'll turn to either Colonel Inez or Colonel Williams, just anywhere you want to take that.
All right, so, boy, I tell you, so the air domain and ground domain, we think we're pretty good at the ground, then you go to air, it just blows your mind, right? So interesting times with small UAS and then the capabilities that it can bring from security and then, if we're really stretching delivery. I think what you'll see on Marine Corps Base Hawaii is a neat place to apply it. We're surrounded by water, and then if you try to dig in the ground, you find things at the state. Make sure there's plenty of laws that you adhere to if you're trying to maybe put a fence post. So I'll get to the point. So that would be the employment of UAS for maybe security, which obviates a fence. Interesting because you have the employment of that capability will be from someone on the ground that maybe isn't trained or understands the air domain, which has its own rule sets. So we are bumping that right now where we want to use the space. We know it's efficient. We know technology can meet us there. But again, the kind of capability to understand the rule sets and then stretch even further, adjust them so someone on the ground can then merge that all together is a real barrier. Funny, we have, same as Chim Chim here, you have air traffic controls that are trained to understand that domain, not the ones that are employing UAS on the ground. So it's a neat way to look at it. So I think until we get there, the space above us will be something we don't really leverage for that technology.
Yeah, I think that as I was just sitting and thinking about how we develop an air, ACOI, how is the airspace constructed when we go into an operational environment? I think that we can very easily manage that. I mean, that is not what will be interesting, and I think what is critical, not only for autonomous airplanes, but autonomous vehicles, is the data and the information and the infrastructure to support it. What is the most efficient? Where do you actually need where do you actually need the distribution of these parts at what time? And to get to Chim Chim's point on the vehicles that rotate through, you need a very reactive ability to support your tenant units for whatever it is in an F-18 on a flight line, or a pump somewhere, or a switch somewhere for the zipper connection. But it's also a lot of an installation runs on a cycle that is very, very deliberate. And if you track it in terms of movement and data, that same squadron runs on a day shift and a night shift. The same, your civilian population comes aboard the installation between 6 and 8:30, and departs between 14:30 and 16:30 almost every day. You would see the spikes of where you need both your mobility for people, for parts, and then and great point. After it's done moving people and parts around during the day, my G4 would love to be able to employ those to make its runs in the middle of the night up to 29 Palms. Wait for the people to come in the morning to unload it. They load it back up. At night, when the traffic's low and it's fed by a data stream, it just picks it up and departs when it's the most efficient. So there's an overlying management, I think, of mobility, an overlying management system of mobility, and a way to approach it where we use it as efficiently as possible and effectively as possible. And to get to Jay's point, where he kept saying, look at mobility as a service, not as a vehicle or not as a a thing. It's a service, and if you continually try to focus on what are we actually trying to accomplish, nobody cares how the park gets to the flight line on time. People really and getting back to the social changes, I don't think people care how they get to work, how they get to the commissary if it's better, right? And anybody who's worked at the Pentagon, if you can get one of those parking spots within a 10-minute walk of those things are gold, because just half your commute can be, walking in from the south lot or the north lot. So, things that get you there are, the things that can get you to the door, people would adopt much more readily.
So let's talk about, often new capabilities, they start from a place of no, right? Anything that's presented in our environment, whether it's because the bureaucracy is so large, and the decisions aren't made at the local level that authorize it. For example, some of the drone companies that we worked with to be able to fly in our training area, we have to go all the way up to the Office of Secretary of Defense to get a cyber exemption waiver just to allow a company that we already know and have a relationship with to be able to fly there. Takes months, right? And so as we talk about a changing dynamic in industry, changing collaborative opportunities for us to earn our seat at the table or bring in the next solution that's coming out and unlock the opportunities on our bases, everything in our bureaucracy starts from a place of no, because we've never done it that way. And it's never quick or easy to unlock that. And so each of you live at the local level of you have real needs and real gaps, and then sometimes real opportunities that present themselves. Can you talk about how, whether in the context of Installation Next, and again, having the aspirational vision of what General Colonies has presented here, tied, and you having the decentralized execution opportunity of turning that to your needs. Can you talk about any of that? We've done lots of things on your bases, especially yours, Colonel Dockery.
Yeah, I think I could start with just the fact that what that opens up is it gets us away from the one-size-fits-all solution. And so I would just relate that to maybe a separate topic, but when we talk about energy, and as I travel around the communities around Miramar, from Tierra Santa to University City to Scripps Ranch, San Diego, in different fora, planning groups, Kiwanis Club, whatever, and I talk about Miramar, and I talk about energy. Inevitably, when I talk about what we're trying to do, the conversation from the crowd and the questions from the crowd become, well, why don't you just do more solar? That's your answer. Your answer is more solar. I'm like, but, well, it's not really for these reasons, And so I think there's probably answers out there, that more tailored, that are probably regionally tailorable. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So what works at Miramar might not work at Hawaii. What works in Hawaii might not work so well on the East Coast, depending on anything from the price of a gallon of gasoline, price of electricity. So we talked a lot about, and one of the things that comes up when I travel around again, and you hit on it, is electric vehicles. And again, I think a lot of times when we talk about that first part of the conversation, what do you want? I want it cheaper, faster, and I want more of it. So when we talk about making things cheaper and cleaner out here in California, a lot of the conversation naturally gravitates towards electric vehicles. Well, I'm not sure that makes it cheaper, because electricity is pretty expensive. But I know outside the West Gate, there's a CNG filling station that's about, well, these days it's probably about a third of the price of what a gallon of gas is now. For those of you that came from out of town, I think Uber, probably April 1st, I think we were $3 a gallon, and now we're at $3.91 on base. So, it's gone up almost $1 in the span of 6 weeks. So I think what that allows is kind of a regional tailorability for this will work here at Miramar, and this is a good solution for our community.
So dovetail with Chim Chim, I'm thinking about just how we do it, and kind of levels of responsibility of action. So I think that the installation team with the local community knows their problem the best. So they really have to drive. Sergeant Major and I were just talking that we're amazed that the solutions and then problems that continue on an installation really sit with a handful of people, just a handful of people. So I think it's them constantly driving to explore opportunities and drive innovation locally, and then make sure that's pushed up, and make sure it's pushed up. I think, interesting, General Colony said, there's a business case for most of these, a trade-off. Well, security is probably the one that we question the most. There's points where we can see it down low, and we think if we grab, we'll have a large breakthrough, and that could be maybe Uber and Lyft coming on base, right? But then, I'm trying to point that's aggressive local action. But then if you connect to higher, they could know something that, maybe you don't know at the local level with the company or something about it. So I think it's a collaboration, aggressive work down low, okay? And then up top, looking to enable. I think that's the way we work through it. And to Chimchin's point, Hawaii is different from Miramar, right? And sometimes I think our one-size-fits-all kind of holds us back.
How I solved this problem is I just pointed to installation next. I said, this is an installation next program or initiative, or could fit into one of its buckets. And if we're worried about, hey, how do we get through our own bureaucracy? We're just, being able to point to something. You create a false bureaucracy, and somebody thinks it's covered then. But I'm serious. So, hey, if Installation Next is real, and it's a program, and it's designed to find solutions, and we can point to that, then getting it institutionalized, getting Installation Next institutionalized without pulling that innovative and kind of look into the future and the mechanisms by which we can connect the individual installations to somebody that's looking to solve problems, through whether that is in whether that's in government, whether that's in your local community, whether that's in industry or academia. If it's an aggregating concept by which you can at least pull something into that, and then all of a sudden you probably have some help, right? You've got somebody that can help you through or has worked through an issue like you've seen before. So I think the Installation Next concept is excellent, and I've actually used it and said, when somebody's called and said, hey, we want to come aboard the installation, and it's like, no, we can't possibly, because and you get the list of reasons. I say, well, it's tied to an Installation Next objective, and we can just put it into that bucket. And I think that that's a good method. And so if we can keep the concept of Installation Next alive and make it robust, then we're able to look at those opportunities and partner with them. They may not, like most things, you're going to run into a lot of things that don't work or can't work, or they do end up against something. But at least you can start the conversation and see where you can get it to, and then share it. Quite frankly, we have a lot of local stuff, but there's things that may apply across the board as well.
All right, gentlemen, so we only have a couple more minutes. Any closing remarks, anywhere you want to take it as far as the opportunity of the ecosystem, like what we were talking about? What are you excited about seeing outside or hearing about from the panels today? Any final thoughts there?
Yeah, I would just say, this would be kind of a weird comment, but I would just say that, I think, Brandon, you've touched on it, certainly General Colony's touched on it, that it's the guys that are in their mid-40s or beyond are probably not the ones that are going to come up with the best solutions, and so we need to get folks, the right people with the right mindset. I'm bringing my kids, as you are. I'm bringing my kids over here this afternoon because my youngest is 12 years old, and he is freaking out over the opportunities to come over here and see autonomous vehicles because it is so interesting to him. And he's into that kind of stuff, and so I think getting the right the people with the right mindset and the right culture, goes back to culture, is going to be critical.
I think we're just going to discover, those of you that solve problems, how layered mobility is. You know, roads are bad in Hawaii. They cost 3 times as much to build them there than they do in California. So there's a huge money piece. The buildings are in the wrong place, but they're all historic, so I can't move them. Cars are disposable in Hawaii. I mean, 400 abandoned cars on the base. Hawaii has cars are disposable, right? 2,700 homes. I think on average, a family has cars. So it's just all connected. So I'm excited to try to figure something out. It's a nice place to walk to work, and ride a bike. So if I can figure that out, you know, Hawaii will be better off.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, I think just my final comment, you know, goes to, you know, we don't know exactly where, you know, what the future of vehicles are or the capabilities that they're going to have, but from an institutional perspective, we have another challenge to meet, not just, you know, the technical challenge of what the vehicles are outside, but something for the audience to think about is, you know, what type of governance, what type of infrastructure, what type of key enablers are installations going to require to enable wherever the technology goes? How is it going to plug in? What are those things in the future that we're going to need to see? And so that's the next kind of, I think the next thing that I'd like to see is so that's a challenge. Where are we, where do we need to be in 10 to 15 years to accommodate where we think, you know, autonomous vehicles and the digital world that we're going to live in, what are we going to need aboard the installations in order to enable that, to even allow it to us to keep pace with society outside the wire.
All right, well, join me in thanking the colonels for giving their perspective on official and personal mobility. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks a lot. Sorry. All right, next up is our Mobility as a Service panel. So we're going to have Lime, we have Lyft joining us, we have Uber, and we have San Diego Association of Governments. I believe I have a next page. So while you're coming up, also if I can ask, again, I can only hear up here. I don't know how bad that echo is. If our team or Eric can help us out with that. And do I need one more chair? Do I need one more chair? All right, I want to take a minute while we're having our next panelists come up, perhaps. There we go. So outside at the exhibit area, we've talked a lot about autonomous vehicles. We've talked about Nikola and the electric vehicle, Plank that's on there. We've mentioned Verizon and AT&T being here, talking about both 5G and how connectivity relates to the future mobility. FirstNet, also cellular connectivity and how that relates to the future mobility, starting with first responders. And then we also have other vendors out there that are showing maintenance. So I mentioned the augmented reality or remote assist for maintenance. So we have RealWare that's out there that's showing their capability. That's all across oil and gas and how they're meeting the needs of that remote assist. We have, talking maintenance again, kind of the eco-friendly cleanup and mostly efficient, you know, repelling of water and only cleaning up the oils based of maintenance on vehicles. So we have a vendor out there that's showing that as well. So we have a diverse group, and there are more. We're excited to see more of them, and we're going to take that break as we come to the next one here. And then if I have Danielle, hey, how are you? And Hal? Hey, Hal, good to see you. All right. So mobility as a service, that's not always a common term. It's essentially what are the service providers that are giving you the options for how you get point A to point B, no matter where you are, no matter where you're trying to go. All right. And so what we've assembled is you know, relationships that we have, whether it's San Diego Association of Governments, and as we have a military council that works with San Diego Association of Governments, whether it's about our LIFT program at Camp Pendleton and how talking about that and kind of even the second and third order effects of what ride hailing can do for our community when you get outside the stovepipe and all. And David's going to talk about Lime and where Lime's going, from traditional bikes to scooters, and what we've tried and where they're going as an industry. And Chris is going to, give us a vision of, where Uber sees where the markets are going and how they're matching supply and demand. And again, without being intentional and without having that vision, we don't allow supply to match demand. We don't give a voice to demand on our bases effectively, and the barriers and the bureaucracy exist. And so some of the things we've tried has really been us pounding against that bureaucracy to find a way to get it together and move something forward. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes the industry moves without you. So we're going to start with Hal, and I'm going to have each of you just introduce who you are in your company, and give everyone that frame of reference. And Hal, I'm hoping you'll start us off by talking about where we are with doing the LIFT program at Camp Pendleton, and what are the benefits and what are the challenges that we see. Microphone, sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hao Meng. I manage the San Diego market at LIFT. About a year ago, we collaborated with the Marine Corps Community Services on a program that increased transportation access at Camp Pendleton. So what this entails is basically through a specialty mode called base mode, we connect riders that are requesting rides from Camp Pendleton with drivers that already have base access. As you can imagine, our rideshare business operates a marketplace, a two-sided marketplace. Our drivers give rides and our riders take rides. And I think this is something that was alluded to, Brandon, before, where in order to make this program work, we can't just turn on Camp Pendleton, right? Because of the high security needs, we kind of had to create a separate marketplace specifically for this program. And probably the most important of which was attracting drivers. Now, living in San Diego with such a strong military community, we're really lucky that 13% of our drivers are veterans today. And so we were able to leverage a lot of that base in order to power our program. However, we still need, and we're continuing to attract more military drivers that are, whether they're active duty, dependents, retirees, employees, and so on and so forth. And a few immediate benefits of the program that really align well with the base's needs, as well as our mission, are: one, providing convenient, on-demand economic form of transportation to the Camp Pendleton community, and also to provide a flexible earning opportunity as well. And I can talk to a little bit more about the long-term in a bit.
Great. Danielle, if you would talk to us about, how outside of our bases, right, how does the community, San Diego Association of Governments specifically, how are you projecting forward into the future? How critical are mobility as a service solutions to that future?
Sure. So for mobility as a service to work, we need to have a number of options, different mode options that are all affordable, clean, safe, and flexible. And I mean, the keys there are being flexible and convenient, because we are, as we talked about, and you talked about in the last panel, kind of a single occupancy vehicle culture. And to move away from that, we need to really be improving the other modes. This represents really a shift in how we invest in transportation. Instead of doing the traditional capacity increasing projects, we need to be looking towards investing in technology, investing in alternative modes, investing in bike transportation, shared, any type of shared mode. So that would be, buses in the oldest form. Also looking at Uber, Lyft, and micro-mobility solutions like scooters and bikes. And so to do that, right now SANDAG is developing a new vision for the future, for what the transportation system is going to look like in 2050. And we've developed 5 big moves that really speak to that. And so those are complete corridors, so looking at corridors that address the technology and all the different modes into one spot. Major investments in high frequency and high capacity transit, mobility hubs, so looking at locationally co-locating all the different modes in major hubs to make them easy so you can seamlessly transfer between modes. Flexible fleets, so those are, shared fleets. That is any mode, bikes, cars. And the last one is called neXt, but it's basically an operating system, a mobility cloud to manage all the different things. So looking at really prioritizing those five moves and moving away from our traditional capacity increasing projects as to where we prioritize our transportation investments. But that's, kind of a tricky thing to do because a lot of the decision makers are kind of bought up into the traditional transportation projects that we work on. So we're trying to shift away from that, but it's definitely going to be challenging.
All right, great, thank you. So coming to David, we just have, and I mentioned earlier, we had Lime traditional bike sharing on 4 bases, both 2 Marine and 2 Navy. So Naval Base Coronado, Naval Base San Diego, here at Miramar, and then Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. And so, we unlocked that opportunity. The one at Camp Lejeune actually wrote into the contract that we would have electric bikes and scooters as part of the service without a plan for how we would actually execute. That one felt harder, right? The bureaucracy was a little, more resistant to get that. And then meanwhile, Lime has made a shift in their market and where they're going after and where they're meeting demand, right? And it impacted us. And so Lime, I'd love to hear where things are going and, where you think the future opportunities are, beyond what we were doing with bike sharing.
I appreciate the question. That's the most polite WTF I think I've heard so far. But first of all, thank you very much for having me. I am the Chief Business Officer of Lime. I lead the business team, primarily BizDev and CorpDev. I started as the interim CFO. Before that, I spent 4.5 years at Uber, leading BizDev, CorpDev, experiential marketing and brand, and I was a member of the ELT when we had no CEO. Then I reported to our CEO. One of my favorite initiatives at Uber, which my team and I started, was Uber Military, where we had 100,000 members and former members of the military and spouses become drivers on the Uber platform. That was done in slightly less than 1 year. And Defense Secretary Gates was one of our sponsors on that. Also, as a former resident of UTC, it's good to be back home where I spent about 7 years. How many scooter users do we have in the audience? All right, I appreciate that. For the rest of you, got to do your homework. It's hard to understand it until you experience it. And I came here with my own notes, but I ended up taking a ton of notes on the prior panel. One of the things I heard is we love our cars. And at first I said yes, and then I said, actually not. We love our cars when we're actually moving at speed, but when we're sitting on the 15, seeing 2 crashes, and instead of being a half hour early, we're 20 minutes late, and then thinking about where we have to park and the costs related to it, I would argue we don't love our cars quite as much. In addition, while I am a cyclist myself, and I do appreciate the fact that we had a deal with several bases, cycling just does not have the same product market fit. When people ask me, how do I decide what kind of business I should go into, they often focus on their team. And respectfully, I say it's about market, and then team. Meaning you have to have product market fit. People have to want to use what you're putting out there and see it as an effective solution for their problem. The total addressable market has to be vast, meaning if people see this solution, it's enough people to make it worth your time, and then the team matters. Respectfully, and to our discredit, bikes don't have that same product market fit. I say that as a cyclist myself, but we put those bikes out there and they go unused. They don't solve the problem of Marines or frankly people more generally, and we saw that. By contrast with scooters, we spend almost no money on marketing and the product market fit is nothing less than remarkable. I say this as someone who did not grow up skateboarding or doing anything on 1 or 2 wheels. The first time I tried it, it was a revelation. It's simply fun. It might be too much fun, and that relates to safety issues, which we might get to later. You should take a little pause and not go gonzo on it the first time. but it's simply a fun as well as safe, reliable, and cost-effective means of getting around. In addition, the price point is just much lower for campus installations. Campuses meaning universities, private enterprises, as well as military bases. It's far more flexible. The footprint is tiny compared to an auto, and people want to use it. I'll pause there so I don't blow my 5 minutes too much.
No, thanks, David. And I'll actually say, I mean, what happened with our relationship with Lime is a perfect embodiment of why we're here. You know, we made a signal, we thought, and we tried something, speed and agility. You know, let's make a concessionaire's contract. Let's unlock the bike sharing market. And Naval Base Coronado had a lot of utilization over the first 6 months. We didn't have as much, and we couldn't understand why. Meanwhile, Lime, the provider, is actually saying, look, you have a 10x growth just on the efficiency and the enjoyment of using a scooter. And maybe I'll blame myself. The inability of then unlocking the barrier between a bike and worrying about helmets and everything else, all the way to, well, let's leverage this relationship to move to the scooter that's really going to meet the needs of those on our bases. We just weren't there, right? The bureaucracy wasn't there. We didn't close the loop fast enough, right? So part of this is we've got to try things. Some things are going to fail. Can we adapt? Can we adapt to the market? You know, all these panelists are talking about trying to anticipate whether the people that live in their region or the customers they're trying to provide solutions for. And so they're adapting quickly, right, in supply and demand, and we're left on the outside because of our nature. And so, again, this is why we're here. This is what we're trying to do. So thank you, Dave.
Actually, if I could just expand on that, one of the colonels in the last session pointed to a sergeant major and looked for affirmation. My own experience at Fort Bragg and in the Uber context was it was the sergeant majors, those playing that role, who actually had the best intuition as to what the servicemen and women in their groups needed. So that's no disrespect to the colonels, but I go even deeper into your units to get as close to ground truth as possible.
Absolutely, thanks. Well, Chris, so, I mean, Uber touches everything, right, nowadays. So, you know, talk to us about where's Uber going? Where do you think, you know, it fits in what we're talking about with mobility and how we're trying to meet the demands of those on our bases?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me here. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Pangilinan. I am our head of public transportation policy at Uber, and I'm really excited to talk about what we're doing here. And it was great to hear from the fellow panelists here, and I think we all agree that reducing personal car usage and private automobile usage is really a goal for all of us. And just because of all the bad things that happen, like David explained very well here with the traffic situation and crashes and so on. And really when we look at what is offered by a lot of these new mobility options like bikes and scooters and ride sharing, is that they do really allow all of us, whether we're in managing a base or managing a city or both, that allow us to really achieve our goals of moving people around as efficiently as possible while also reducing our impact on the environment and really having a sustainable form of transportation available to us. And so what we're doing with the Uber platform is really trying to use that platform as it is intended to be a launching point for riders to use to find what transportation mode is best for them, really fulfilling that mobility as a service ideal. And so what we've done recently is we've worked with Denver Regional Transit District, as well as the London Transport for London agency, and launched a partnership with them on public transportation to allow Uber users, if you open up your app in that city, you'll be able to look at, let's say you're going from the airport to downtown, you'll see the usual Uber options, but you'll also see public transportation right next to it. And a lot of times, especially in bigger cities like London, you'll notice that transit is perhaps cheaper and faster. And so we'll step you through the way to get from point A to point B on transit. And in Denver, as of 2 weeks ago, you'll even be able to pay for your ride in the Uber app now. And so this allows riders to really have multiple options to get around. And so as we learn from these successes in Denver and London, we'll be trying to expand to as many cities as we can to really give you the full transportation breadth when you open this app. And I think that's sort of what we want to go for when we're looking at opening up in these options in cities or bases, for example, that people here can really find the best way to get to the grocery store or to get back home. Maybe if it's a nice sunny day, maybe a scooter is the right way to go. And I want to talk to David's point. I know some of you didn't raise your hand when he asked. in the wheelchair, I even tried a scooter once, and I don't know if it was totally, kosher, but I tried it. And boy, I was convinced, right, at that point that scooters really are the way to go for quite fast transportation. When perhaps ride sharing or transit is maybe not for the really short distances. But I highly encourage you to try all these different modes, and on the Uber platform, we'll be offering as many of these modes as possible. That way we can really fulfill the travel needs, whether they be short distances or long distances, by yourself or with others, using the city public transportation, using a ride share, using a scooter or bike. They'll all be available to you.
All right, thanks, Chris. So I'm going to come back to how. We spend a lot of time crafting the lift up. Yes, sorry. All right, starting over. I'm going to come back to how and talk about Lyft and what we're doing, second and third order effects at Camp Pendleton. We spent a lot of time kind of building the vision as to why and what are the second and third order effects of unlocking ride hailing. From job opportunities, right? We have a dynamic, not just the workforce that may be transitioning out and wants to take that career or that job opportunity with them wherever they're going to go. Maybe it's the spouses that don't have as many job opportunities. And again, dynamic need meeting, right? Like the opportunity to drive today and not drive tomorrow, and completely up to you. And what about veterans and retirees that already have access to a base? And so targeting the people that are already in the market, if you will. So there are those aspects. There's DUI reduction, which is a huge thing. There's even safety on ride hailing. I'll hand this over. I'm sorry. So even with safety, we have taxis that have access through a program to be able to get on base. But we know less about that taxi driver. We know less about where they're going. We know less than they may have handed off that pass to one of the other drivers that's going to drive on today. Then these companies know about their contractors, right? Their drivers, both Lyft and Uber. And so there's all these second and third order effects, but you start to build this complex narrative that sounds incredible, but you still only have these stovepipe stakeholders that care about these pieces, right? And so How, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about any of those second and third order effects. I saw the Lyft canopy on Camp Pendleton just last week. You still driving up drivers, if you will, that are on the base?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of second order effects, you summarized them very well, Brandon, is in terms of flexible earning opportunities, as well as DUI reduction and actually ultimately reduction of personal vehicles. So in terms of the flexible opportunity, is one thing that we talked about a lot is how, due to how frequently our service members and their families move, right? Sometimes, especially for the dependents, it's really difficult to find a long-term role. And Lyft offers that sort of earning opportunity without any long-term obligations. It's when you want, where you want, for as much as you want. And also, it provides supplementary income for our active duty, which has actually been a little bit surprising to me in that that's probably been our most successful cohort, which I was not expecting going into this. So to the colonels that are here, I apologize. And then thirdly, for the retirees, in addition to the earnings aspect, what I found to be really interesting is it serves their desire to connect to a bigger community, right? Some of them don't even care about the earnings as much as I want to be able to contribute to my community and be a member of this community, even though I'm not officially necessarily serving any right now. And we have a ton of retirees in San Diego, given lovely memories, honestly, of Camp Pendleton when they were here many, many years ago, as I know that, spoken to many of my drivers. In terms of reduction of DUI, I think, I know that on base there are already programs like the taxi program that you were talking about. I think one key unlock that we have here with Lyft is, at least to me, it's about the ride to wherever they're heading to that evening, right? That way, you're already planning your evening ahead of time, and you don't worry, or do you have a need to worry about, what am I gonna do with my vehicle that is parked wherever it is parked, right? And so you plan ahead versus being in that kind of dilemma when you're might be inebriated or under the influence. And actually, 74% of San Diego's drivers, according to our surveys, have already improved or are less likely to drive impaired as a result of Lyft's availability. And then third is the reduction in need of personal vehicles. I mean, you talked a lot about this in the previous panel in terms of the hurdles, right? Camp Pendleton's 125,000 acres. That is, you need a personal vehicle in order to get around. And we heard a lot about the pain points in terms of families sharing one car or a lot of folks not having a car because it's not financially feasible, right? Especially when you're here, when you move around so much. And so for us, it was really important to provide that transportation access to the community, and we definitely want to continue working on this, and that's why we keep acquiring more drivers, because it's important to have a on-demand, convenient and economic transportation service on the base.
Danielle, help us understand how, I don't want to say it's easy, maybe it's easier, right? But how do you anticipate, the current needs and the future needs across your constituents?
Sure. So you were talking earlier about, the last ones to be adapting. Not that we're not forward thinking and moving in that direction, but the fact is that Uber, Lyft, and Lime, they can change what they offer and what modes they offer and how they do it and update their app pretty quickly, whereas we're planning 30 years out to the future, 40 years out to the future, and what the future of transportation is, which we don't really know that well because everything is changing and technology is being adopted so rapidly. So we're really trying to stay at the forefront by implementing short-term projects and developing public-private partnerships, working towards that to try to take advantage of these new technologies, showcase them, and show how they can work for the region. But looking out to the future, how do we plan for what we don't know? It's really a challenge. Uber, Lyft, Lime, they've all introduced, just kind of transportation industry disruptors that we're really unprepared for in a way. We don't have the infrastructure to support them. Where does a scooter go? A scooter goes, in a bike lane, but our bike lanes aren't really built for scooters. Sidewalks aren't the right place for them. And, people drive scooters differently. I was one of the people that raised my hand as a scooter rider, but I don't really go over 5 miles an hour because I'm frightened when I'm on that thing. It's fun, it's exhilarating, but my forearms are sore the next day because I'm like gripping on for dear life. And, the other scooter riders are whirling past me. And so, it's, what should our infrastructure, what should our streets look like? We have this kind of traditional definition of what complete streets should look like and how they should accommodate all the different modes, but as that keeps changing, it's not easy to, paint is cheap. We can repaint streets, pretty cheaply, but beyond that, curb space, how do we allocate curb space with the, increased need for loading and unloading versus, what curbs have traditionally been used for parking, for package delivery and things like that. So, everything's changing, and we're as fast as we can planning for the future to accommodate all these new modes. But, Uber says that they're going to have flying cars and flying taxis in 2022, I think. Is that right? Yeah, that's what I heard was either 2020.
We'll show you a great video on this later in the urban air mobility panel.
I don't think I answered your question at all, but...
Well, but you highlighted the challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you'd ask, the industry side of this, the answer is not as simple as just open the markets and let it go, right? Like, each of you have worked very carefully with the cities and the regions to craft the appropriate policy, right? And how do we kind of follow in suit of that and unlock it? And I'll just mention, we actually have a memorandum of understanding with SANDAG. You'll hear later from the city of San Diego, where we have another one, to work on projects together, to collaborate and share information and work on that future, and so as they unlock their regions or city for opportunity, how can we follow in suit of that same policy? Often we follow state, regulations for roads, not out of law, but out of convenience, because our drivers are happening external to the, they're driving external to the base, and then they come on our base. But we have the ability to adapt, but we have to have a reason. We have to have a precedent setter that we're following, right? Someone that's more informed in the space than us. And I think that's the type of relationship we're trying to foster and better follow their lead. And I'll turn to Chris and David. How are you shaping, the cities to be informed, the regions to be informed about their policy to just meet the needs of their constituents? And what should we be looking at, and how should we do it as well?
Well, first off, I have to tell Danielle, you could ride a scooter whatever speed you're comfortable at, and it's cool. But the Marines will run faster than 5 miles.
I think I run faster.
Okay. But it actually goes to the point that a disproportionate number of injuries happen on a first ride or in less than 10 rides. So give yourselves a break and go more slowly at the beginning, just like you would on most different endeavors. I'll also admit that when I first tried a different mobility device, my last deal at Uber was jump bikes, and I loved it, and I love using jump bikes, and I liked it when I came in last night. I left the airport, went to my favorite old sushi place, Sushi Oda, and there were 2 jump bikes parked outside, which was amazing to me, and the parking lot was more empty. But I like scooters more. When I first started, I put on all the safety gear because at 50 years plus, coming off a toe injury, I did not want to be one of those casualties. And my wife told me I look like a nerd, and my 4-year-old told me I look like a superhero. So tell yourself you look like a superhero and get used to it first, and then it gets easier and easier. Going to the actual question, I apologize for the digression. It goes perhaps to Colonel Williams' point, speaking to infrastructure. There are various things that have to be done with cities and other planners, and I'd love it if there were actually more planners here, because there are different aspects of the devices which can be improved upon. So our level 3 device, our version 3, has bigger wheels. It has shock absorbers, dual shock absorbers. It has not just a handbrake, but also a foot brake. It has a wider platform. But all of that pales in comparison to building infrastructure that will make these a safer way, both for the people on the scooters as well as pedestrians, cyclists, and others. And all of that is a longer-term project. But I'd suggest we should wipe our minds of our current infrastructure. And if you said to yourselves that we're going to allocate anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of all space to vehicles that are simply sitting there, not being used, and then move somewhere else where they sit there and not being used, no one in this room would approve that. So I would recommend a blank slate approach, particularly for installations where you have more power, because it is command and control. You can look out X number of years and come up with a radically different plan. We're seeing that in the building of certain cities. In Arizona, as a state, is leading the way. Whether in Tucson or otherwise, you're seeing communities that no longer have parking requirements. So the old days of X number of parking spots per X thousand square feet being built, that's gone. One startup called Cul-de-sac is leading the way. They will have no parking. They will have Lyft and Uber vouchers for all their participants in their communities, dedicated ingress and egress, no parking spots. They'll also have other means of getting around, whether e-bikes or otherwise. I brought this because I had certain notes that I wanted to share, but I ended up filling the pages with notes from the prior panel. That's the kind of relationship we're looking for, not just with the armed services, but also with legislators all over. So we've hired a very capable head of government relations. He and his team are working all over the world. It is one of the 3 pillars of what we do. Operational excellence, because this is an idea, but absent operational excellence, it just doesn't matter. Put differently, ideas are cheap. It's getting it done day after day. That's hard, expensive. That's our differentiator. Hardware, we have 75 individuals, frankly, in Shenzhen. One of our 3 founders is based there, sourcing and designing our own equipment as opposed to buying off the shelf and kludging together a system on a device that was not meant for mass use. We build our own. We've been doing so almost from the start. Finally, and not least significantly, Active GR. It's one of our largest teams. We're in over 25 countries, over 100 markets. We've now done 50 million scooter rides. That's since February of last year. We plan to actually increase that growth markedly, as well as demonstrating positive unit economics. We're doing that in conjunction with the local authorities.
Thanks. I think this is a really interesting topic of how is it that us as private companies can work together with the cities, with governments such as where Danielle works and others around the country, in order to help both parties achieve their goals. And I think that's the big part is helping cities and working with cities to help them and really lay out explicitly what they're trying to accomplish in their transportation system, and really helping and having cities really acknowledge that A, B, and C are our top 3 priorities. And by doing so, let's just kind of say a lot of cities have priority A, which is reducing congestion or reducing emissions, improving the efficiency of our transportation system. And you see a lot of these new modes out there right now, such as bikes and scooters, as well as ride sharing that Uber and Lyft offer, and public transportation, of course. And we do see that there is a sort of a misallocation in street space out there right now. And I think one thing that we can look at doing is try to understand, for example, with our curb space is, as David alluded to here earlier, do we really want to be allocating all that space just for private automobile storage 90% of the day? Whereas if it is a pickup and drop-off space, it can accommodate perhaps 10, 20 people per hour getting on and off per 20-foot space. And that kind of changing, I think, really changes the way we design our cities and design our facilities. All of a sudden, parking is not a big need anymore. We can put something else there, like an apartment complex or a park or something else. And we can just really look at our transportation system as one system, as opposed to private autos and other modes and transit. Will really go a long way in that direction. One thing that we're doing at Uber is releasing and updating our movements website. If you go to, I think the website is movements.uber.com. It is our public data sharing website that anybody can get into, but it's really aimed at city planners and city officials. So I used to be a transportation planner myself at the city of San Francisco and in New York, and this kind of data, we would have to usually procure it from a private company and pay a lot of money for that. And now what we're trying to do is using all of our speed data and origin destination data that we have with our ride sharing. We're currently sharing data now on travel times between spaces in cities, and we'll be updating that soon with more data in the coming weeks. But I think this will be a great first step into providing cities with insights into what travel is like in their cities, and being able to use that data to plan more effectively, or at least advocate for policies that would be more aligned with the outcomes that cities want. For example, more bike lanes, bike/scooter lanes, pick-up and drop-off areas, and infrastructure that supports this kind of mobility as a service offering.
Thanks, Chris. Danielle, I wonder if you talk to us about Waze Carpool. I don't know if we discussed that beforehand. If you're...
I'm not a good person to talk about Waze Carpool, but I can tell you briefly that we have a partnership with them, and it's just a new way. Sandag has traditionally done carpool and vanpool matching since much longer than I've been there. I've been there 16 years, but I think since the 70s or 80s we've been doing that. And so Waze is our new way for carpool matching, and they're providing us with, it's just a much more dynamic way of doing it, where you can find people quickly that are going your route. So I know it's been a great partnership. And
yeah, so we actually piggybacked both ourselves and the Marine Corps and the Navy and the region on Sandag's contract with Waze, and trying to really market to the commuters in our region on how they get to base, right? And again, dynamically matching them to people that are also going around the same time to base. And what we found is when you don't have a healthy environment of carpoolers, it's hard to grow it out of nothing, right? And one of the things we bring, I think, as an institution, is the opportunity, to go beyond the local region where we're talking, So we then help foster the relationships between Waze and Northern Virginia Regional Commission on going to where slug line, if anyone's familiar with that, but in the Northern Virginia area, people are already used to standing on a certain location, being picked up by people they don't know, driven to locations, central locations in and around Northern Virginia and DC. And so the behavior's already there, and the opportunity to meet their needs in a more dynamic way. And then you see the explosion of, the utilization of that dynamic capability. And so it's one thing that we, again, have tried here. We're trying to find the implications and how we unlock it, not just here, not just where the opportunity arose with Sandag, but even beyond our entire network of our, co-collaborators, if you will.
I just want to add, one of the things that's great about the Waze partnership is just how many people use the app already. Instead of, we've always had kind of traditional carpool matching. Instead of trying to get somebody, funnel people to a whole different website, a whole different app, it's something that people are already using, and it's great.
That's a great segue to you three, which is we have plenty of ideas how we meet the needs of Marines via apps. Challenge is always, do we have the right incentive for the person developing to actually do supply and demand and match what the demand would be? But then also, you've got to get the Marines there, right? And each of you have a platform that you have to get the customer to your platform, to the app, right? So can you talk to us about, and it doesn't even have to be the implications of just mobility. We'll start with you, Hal, but like once you have them there, how else are you trying to meet their needs, or how do you keep them there?
Sure. I think overall, the way that we see the future of transportation is cities to be built around people and not cars. Kind of like what Chris was saying earlier is, instead of building new parking lots, new freeways, we're building parks and housing and what the community really needs. And so that's why we are investing a lot, in addition to rideshare, bikes and scooters, as well as shared rides, to better connect to our public transit, existing public transit, and really to help people get around in the way that makes the most sense, that is most economical and most convenient for them, so that really it's about how do we power cities without ending traffic, decreasing our greenhouse gases, and overall providing a more, I would say, even accessible and more enjoyable lifestyle.
Thanks.
So I like how you framed it earlier when you said the behavior is already there and we try to meet it dynamically. And that to me is key. The more you try to come up with the system without recognizing the needs that you're trying to meet, the more likely, surprisingly, it is that it will fail. So recognize what people are using. It might not have to be your service women and men, but it should be what you're seeing in the community at large. Put differently, the more that we try to put people into fixed types of transit at particular times in particular modalities with people they might not want to be traveling with, the lower the likelihood that they will actually use it. The more you give people the freedom to experience different types of transit on their own timeline, frankly, with people if they want to be, not with people if they don't want to be, the more likely they are to use it. One point of differentiation for Lime is that people typically don't experience us through the app first. They're walking along, see the scooter, things that look maybe ridiculous, then they see someone zip by, they say, huh, they give it a try, they use it. The way to use it is to download the app. That's the marketing. Unlike Uber, Lyft, and others, there are no security concerns for bases because there are no drivers coming onto the bases. So long as you have chargers who are on the bases, which could be an employment opportunity for spouses or others who are not actually service people but on the bases anyway, you don't have to worry about security on the bases. I actually admire what Uber is doing in terms of having an Amazon-like panoply of options. Full disclosure, Uber is an investor in Lime. The Lime scooters and, in very rare jurisdictions, bikes are available on the Uber platform, and that reflects a desire, I believe. Well, I'll let Chris speak to Uber's desires. I apologize. Suffice it to say that when Colonel Williams says half your commute is from the south lot to the door, it reminded me of how I felt as a clerk for a judge. The judges sat in their cars steps from the entrance to a courthouse, and the clerks were a half mile away. That was craziness. Would I have driven as opposed to using a scooter, leave my scooter by the door and walk in? Of course not. Did I drive because that was the only option? Yes. Once there are more options to people that actually fit their use case, they simply will use them. Finally, the rigor and perhaps the risk-averse nature of the military is a plus, because once Lyft or Uber or Lime convinces the military to adopt it, you force us to have greater rigor in how we implement. So getting over that hurdle might be harder, but then we, and arguably you and your personnel, derive greater benefits because we can't just put it down and see what happens. It has to be a greater thought, and it's a related matter. The bike deal was done before my time, but I do own it, and I do regret it. There won't be another circumstance like that with scooters.
Great. I think this is an interesting question. Is basically how do you get people on this platform, or whatever platform it might be? And I'm thinking. I think Hao and David did a good job of answering that question. And I want to speak more about sort of the three things I think people need if you're creating a transportation platform or creating any kind of platform. And they need to be, one, either solving a problem and solving it well, or two, inspiring a vision that someone's attracted to, and three, making it easy. And so if you're, with the Uber app, it's really well known now. I mean, most people know about it. It's easy to get, it's easy to use. It solves a problem, it solves your transportation problem. And generally, if you're trying to be carless or you're trying to use scooters and bikes, you generally have a broader vision in your head that you want to be more green or you want to be more sustainable. And so it sort of hits on all three of those things here. And I think Lyft and Lime also do that as well. And I think we're going to be trying to move people away from private automobiles, we have to admit that private automobiles have been doing it for 100 years now and better. And so the car commercials create the vision, right? The status symbol. The convenience of free parking on both ends and free driving and low gas tax, low gas prices. And it instantly solves your problem getting from point A to point B if there's not a crash on 15 or anything like that. And that's something that we have to overcome because, and I think and part of that is creating a better product on our end, but it's also about making sure that the cities have the policies and the data that they need, and they're armed with those policies to shape the way the transportation system evolves to really achieve what the outcomes we want. If we're all in private cars, it's just not a good thing for cities, not a good thing for society, and we end up with a lot more problems than we do solutions. But in order to take that individual aspiration to drive a car and move it on to what all the four of us or the five of us here on stage want to see, then we need to be better at those three things, again, of creating a vision, solving their problems, and making it easy to use.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes, and I wanted to really do a little market forecasting with you about where do you see the trends going beyond what we all see out in the community today, and so where are you growing towards? I'll just highlight, one of the most interesting Lyft rides I've ever had was a driver that picked me up here in the region, and they had 3 phones on their dash because they drove for 7 different services: Lyft, Uber, 3 lunchtime delivery services, Amazon in the morning doing their packages, and 1 other package delivery, right? And so he was all excited because he had designed, the code to basically optimize all 3. It was interesting. He was a little distracted while we were driving, by the way. But there's a lot more out there than just what we know about, me getting a ride or me getting a scooter, right? And so we're watching the trends, and so we often on this side don't see all the trends that we should. So help us across all 4 of you with some market forecasting here about where we see ourselves 5, 10 years from now. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I can take it first. I think it's really interesting to think about because 10 years ago, or I think it was maybe 10 or 11 years ago, the iPhone was invented, and that's not that long ago. And so none of this existed back then, in quotes, because that's not that long ago. And so it's really amazing to think about what will happen in the 2020s, right, which is just around the corner. And I think you're seeing, though, a move toward at your fingertips convenience. People are really wanting to, especially in urban areas, want things to come to them instead of them trying to go to things. Cars coming to them to pick them up, scooters on a map so they can see where they are, food delivery, grocery delivery, drone delivery, all these things happening. And I think the way that I could see going forward is and I think this is an ideal kind of scenario, but I think it's very plausible, is city governments and local governments really looking at what is best to shape both for the individual people who live in their cities as well as the city at large, and really starting to get a handle on being able to harness all this new technology for the good of cities. And I think a lot of these technologies can really bring some serious conveniences to people. And this is an example of one of these. There's something called, which many of you might be familiar with, paratransit for people with disabilities in public transportation. And what that is it's a parallel paratransit service that allows people with disabilities who can't board fixed route buses for whatever reason in their disability to take a van. And it's not on demand. It requires a 24-hour reservation. There's a half-hour arrival window. It costs like between $40 and $60 a ride for the city to pay for, and the user pays between the $2.75 or $5 a ride. So it's really just an inefficient system all around. And what the transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft, have provided is the ability for public transportation agencies to partner with us to provide on-demand service that is now arriving within half an hour, is wheelchair accessible, will get you to somewhere within 20 minutes, and only costs $20 a ride instead of $60 a ride. So cities are saving money, riders are getting to where they want to go faster, and it's just a really great, I think, confluence of technology and policy coming together to benefit people. And I really want to see more of that going forward.
So maybe I'll draw a picture with a couple of anecdotes. I first used Uber in October 2010. I was one of the first 4,000 users because I was friendly with the then CEO, and I had moved to San Francisco and I couldn't get a cab, plain and simple. It was revelatory, the idea that you had this thing that showed up actually when you expected it to, and you could get out without having to deal with cash or a credit card. And that magical feeling has now become mundane in almost a good way because we just take it for granted. I think right now scooters are going through a similar magical feeling. It's, as one person put it, like a magic carpet. You get on it, a mile and a half later, you hop off, you leave it, go about your day. That is a great feeling. It will cause people to change behavior, similar to the way Uber and Lyft and certain others did as well. My father is now in his 80s, thought I was crazy when I suggested to him that he and my mom would get in a stranger's vehicle and then go from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Now, the only reason he has a smartphone, which he resisted for many years, was because Uber, or Lyft for that matter, allow him to get around when he shouldn't be driving as an 80-year-old who probably shouldn't be driving at night after a drink or two. It's changed his life. Similarly, micromobility changes the way people go short distances. Right now, it's primarily scooters. It will be other things as well. We experimented with bikes. It didn't work quite as robustly, but we will continue experimenting and new things will pop. Autonomous vehicles will be happening. They'll be happening at scale sooner than people believe. First, it will service differently abled and older people. You're seeing that already in retirement communities in Florida, as well as in Japan, which pioneered semi-autonomous vehicles, which dramatically reduced injuries as well as physical damages to cars. Finally, and this is where I love what Uber is doing, people might laugh at vertical takeoff and landing, but it is real. And I would argue it happens at scale far faster than people believe because the roadways in the air are far less congested than the roadways on the ground. You don't have the randomness of pedestrians and even worse, cyclists, which are the random actions of pedestrians, but with speed that simply does not exist in the air. So I am very bullish on VTOL. I'll admit that was one of the last things I worked on at Uber. They helped push that forward in a way. They also helped accelerate certain things on AV. People forget that in 2014, and I experienced this firsthand, I'd go to major auto manufacturers and they'd say, yeah, AV's on our roadmap for 2035. That has radically changed. I believe something similar will happen with VTOL. I look forward to that panel today.
Great. And David gave us some great plugs for our later panels after lunch, so that was awesome. Thank you.
I owe you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I just want to touch on, we recently completed a commute behavior survey, which in addition to collecting data was also looking at the individuals' preferences. So, how did they prefer to go to work and what were the reasons why? And no matter what mode people took to work, whether it was public transit, van pool, driving alone, carpooling, they all had the same reasons behind it, which was primarily convenience. So looking forward, we all know that the new technology is coming, where autonomous vehicles are on our doorstep. We have all these new emerging technologies that are fantastic and really going to open the doors. The amount of convenience that they provide, it's going to be kind of a dual thing between the technology and the policy. And so really what the future of transportation looks like depends so much on our policymakers and the decisions that they make over the next few years and how we incorporate these into our infrastructure and into our transportation system. So instead of speculating, I'm just kind of going to leave it at that.
Right. Thank you.
In the same spirit, I think you summarized that really well, right? What Chris and David were talking about, the convenience, the excitement, the on-demand of everything coming to us, whether it's a scooter, whether it's a car to address our needs. But also, Danielle, you're talking about how could our city infrastructure, meet that demand, and what type of policies do we need to create in order to kind of, because there's a healthy tension, right, between the convenience and everything, but also we have a limited number of streets, and we may even have limited amount of airspace later on, right, and regulating the tension in a good way that optimizes for both what the city's needs, what our community needs, what our environment needs, and ultimately what the people need.
All right. Well, great. We want to thank you. Help me thank our panelists today for Mobility as a Service. I will say there's an incredible echo here. So not only do they have great expertise and they articulated it very well, but they're doing it with an echo in their head that's just reverberating. So thank you very much for taking your time, come and join us today. And we're welcoming all of you into the exhibit area. This is not just about hearing something, right? And it's not just about speaking. So, please find opportunity to talk further about the concepts that were presented here. All right. Join us outside, please.